Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to see so many people in the room. My name is Beate Kampmann. I'm trying to chair this session, which is not facilitated by the fact that we wanted to have so many people on the panel because it's such an important topic. And what we're trying to do here is demonstrate an ecosystem of the vaccine value chain. And we still have one of our speakers missing, but he's going to come in a minute, I'm sure. But I think we kick off in the interest of time. So, Implementation of Vaccine Manufacture in Africa is the title for this workshop this afternoon. And as the word workshop says, it's work in progress. And we felt we should take the opportunity of the World Health Summit to bring together the various stakeholders who are in the room. And we wanted to really critically look on the opportunities and challenges and make this a dialogue. So I'm very much hoping that we can keep to time to have about half an hour for the discussion at the end, because it's really important also to hear from all of you how you see the progress. If I can manage this technology, that'd be even better. Oh yeah, okay. Oops. Right. Just to set the scene a little bit, most of you are aware that through the COVID pandemic, we experienced an unequal distribution of vaccines in Africa in particular, and this led to the African Union developing this very bold concept as the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, PAVM, as we call it short, which is a framework for action and really a call to achieve a goal that is quite a lofty goal, which is to enable the African vaccine manufacturing industry to develop and supply over 60% of the total vaccine doses required on the continent by 2040. And that is a really steep increment because at the moment, more than 94% of all vaccines used in Africa are imported from other countries. And so we're here today to look at this framework of action, which has really an ecosystem. And this ecosystem is needed for success. And it has a number of bold programs, which we're hoping to fill with some detail today. And we have tried to bring the ecosystem of this program of work into this room. And I'm delighted to say that I think we have kind of managed that, although there might be people who think we're not fully catered here, so please raise your voice. We haven't yet got the participatory engagement from the people who are ultimately going to use these vaccines, but we have members from Gavi, from the EU, from industry, from the FDA in Rwanda, from the GIZ, academia, and I think that gives us a good start into the program where you can see here the different talks that we've put together, which are also hopefully in your program. And we have structured it in a way that we will give everybody 5 minutes to make a pitch of their particular perspective, and then we leave a couple of minutes for one specific question to that particular speaker. And if we go over the 7 minutes I've allocated for speakers, I'll wave, or my colleague Nicholas will wave the red table tennis thing. Raise it, Nicholas, so people can see. Because we need to keep to time in order for us to have time for the panel discussion afterwards. So I'm afraid we're missing our pop star at the moment because Yodi has been very much in demand all through the entire conference here. But that doesn't matter. We can start with our second speaker. And I very much welcome Dr. Emile Bienvenu from the FDA in Rwanda. And apart from Manuel and me, we don't have any other PowerPoints. So I'm going to leave you the program because then you can see the sequence of the talks. But people will be talking through, their microphones. And maybe, Emile, if you wanted to start, give us a perspective from Rwanda. How is this whole PAVM falling into place for you? And tell us what you've prepared for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for speaking in this session on building a vaccine industry in Africa. We all know that building a vaccine industry in Africa we rely on developing a conducive environment for the growth of the pharmaceutical sector overall, and thereafter dealing with the particularities of vaccine manufacturing. Talking about the context of Rwanda, this is what Rwanda did. Initially, Rwanda started by coming up with a strategic direction through the National Vision 2050. We started by having a Vision 2020, and later on, we initiated another Vision 2050, and we even came up with what we call NST1, National Strategy for Transformation. These two strategic documents could allow us to come up with strategic directions and policy priorities to develop the pharmaceutical sector. Strengthening the pharmaceutical sector in the country has become one of the government of Rwanda priorities. Having these two documents I have indicated was actually the starting point, and they allow the development of the pharmaceutical sector. The government of Rwanda vision on the pharma sector has two important targets. One was to attract investors to come up with the establishment of a number of pharmaceutical companies in Rwanda, because Rwanda, as other African countries, depends on importing pharmaceuticals, including vaccines, as she mentioned. That was the first priority, to attract investors. The second one was to transform the country into a regional hub for pharmaceutical production and vaccine manufacturing. When it comes to attracting investors, this was the starting point for vaccine manufacturing. As you all know, Rwanda has initiated an mRNA vaccine manufacturing agenda through the partnership with BioNTech. The chief operating officer will come back to this. That was number one. Number two, Rwanda plans to build on this and develop a complete value chain for vaccine production, because we've seen that vaccine production or vaccine manufacturing has an entire ecosystem. It's not talking about manufacturing and think about establishing a pharmaceutical company. We need to think about the entire ecosystem. And to achieve this, in Rwanda, a diagnostic for the pharmaceutical sector has been conducted. A roadmap was developed, and the work streams, different work streams, those are development pillars, were created to make easy the ecosystem development. For vaccine manufacturing, Rwanda has put in place a coordinating body, the National Vaccine Manufacturing Task Force. On these work streams, maybe I can mention them without going into details for the interest of time. We've created the first pillar. This is research and development and clinical development. That is the first pillar, just to be able to back vaccine manufacturing. And the second one was the regulatory framework. The third one is supply chain. The fourth one, manufacturing, even if we know that this is the responsibility of the manufacturer. But we made sure that this pillar is also taken into account to make sure that we have developed end-to-end capabilities for manufacturing and related support services. The fifth one is human capital. This is a cross-cutting one. For all the pillars, we thought about creating critical skills in relevant medical research and manufacturing fields, but also other support fields like technology and engineering. When you talk about vaccine manufacturing, people would think about, creating people who are going to get involved in manufacturing. But you will need, technology. You will need engineers. So this pillar is taking into account all these in the context of Rwanda. Rwanda is considering to include other pillars, such as access to finance. You easily understand this. There's nothing you can do if you don't have finance. Another pillar which we would like to include is environment and sustainability. So for each pillar, a roadmap for the development of each pillar has been developed, has been created, along with concrete actions. We do have actions for these 5 pillars, which we are now implementing from one step to another. And we are closely monitoring the development of each pillar. Another thing which we did for each pillar, we have mobilized all resources, and the relevant partnerships have been secured. There is another important pillar which I want to mention. I talked about it, and this is about strengthening the regulatory framework. How did we start? Rwanda started by creating in 2018 a medicines regulatory agency. This is Rwanda Food and Drugs Authority, Rwanda FDA. And the objectives were for Rwanda FDA to first of all achieve WHO maturity level 3 as part of the overall project to achieve maturity level 4 and to be designated as a WHO listed authority, which is going to be to replace what we used to call stringent regulatory authorities. The second objective was to build human resource capacity required for regulatory oversight of vaccine manufacturing. To facilitate this, Rwanda has initiated support programs to make sure that this is achieved. When we talk about reaching maturity level 3 and capacitating the authority to be able to provide oversight to vaccine manufacturing, you need actually to deploy a number of programs. You know, those are 2 different priorities. They are interconnected, but they are different in terms of requirements. That is the reason why we have mobilized relevant regulatory partnerships, including the main one, which is the twinning cooperation with regulatory agencies from 7 European Union member states. And we have signed a number of other agreements, like the recent one we have signed with the Paul Ehrlich Institute. And we have agreements with the maturity level 3 African national regulatory agencies, such as Ghana FDA, Tanzanian Medicines and Medical Devices Authority, and we are, negotiating others with other ML3 countries like Egypt, like South Africa, Nigeria, and yes, those are the ML3 countries in Africa. So Rwanda FDA has initiated collaboration with the specialized institutions such as IVI, International Vaccine Institute. We have recently signed an agreement with the IVI, and IVI has actually been training our staff when it comes to increase our knowledge and skills in vaccine-related topics. So to summarize this, Rwanda has secured drivers to success. And the most important is actually the strong government commitment and support with clear vision guiding all the initiatives and the creation of a conducive operating environment for the biopharmaceutical research and manufacturing sector development. So Rwanda would like to build on these initiatives to develop a complete vaccine value chain. This is what I can mention at a national level for Rwanda, but at continental level, I have to mention that the creation of AMA, African Medicine Agency, will boost the establishment of pharma manufacturing facilities in Africa. And this will build on existing initiatives such as programs that are under the PAVM that she was mentioning, and building on existing initiatives will actually allow Africa to speed up the establishment and fostering of vaccine manufacturing industry in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Bienvenu. Welcome, Yodi. I've started with the granular view, and you will take us to the more continental view on what you see has been implemented, is yet to be implemented. Just give us your take on the situation before we go through these different agencies that are also represented here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that is that on?
Yes, I think so.
I'm sorry I'm late. I was hosting a lunch myself, so I had to totter down the stairs in my heels. But I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to be quite brief so that we can have questions if there's time at the end, but take you historical and talk about how I was very fortunate and honoured to plan the initial PAVM meeting together with my brother John in Kegasong when he was then at Africa CDC, then as part of the continental response to COVID. It was very much a time of urgency. There was an urgency. There was a what can we do in this moment because we're afraid, because we as a people, we as a continent, we are afraid. Going down the line, that was handed over to various people, and there were sort of, I believe, there have been some challenges, and we need to. Those who know me in the room, and I see Michelle sitting, my friend at the back. Hi, Michelle, and many others know that I'm always practical and I'm always frank. So I'm going to not shy from that today.
That's why we invited you.
What we need in Africa is end-to-end manufacturing. We don't need cut-and-paste models. We don't need to have. We don't need to be pacified, because I think what happened after the initial push from Africa for manufacturing of vaccines was that there was a sense of, okay, well, let's just pacify. Let's just give particular appeasements to sort of keep Africa quiescent, not quiet, but maybe quiescent in this moment. So that's on one side. On the Africa side, I think we all were in a panic. All the countries. I mean, I had a phone call just I forget which country I'm in, but before I left Nigeria, from somebody at an international organization saying, all the Nigerian government wants to talk to us about is manufacturing of vaccines. Can I have a meeting with you? The bottom line is not everybody can make vaccines. So we have to first of all come to that reality. Not everybody can make vaccines, because at the end of the day, last, as we say in my language, who's going to buy them? So let's be realistic. Who's going to buy these vaccines? Who's going to purchase them? So we have to have a plan as a continent, and I think we have to almost, those of you who in your family, you will have little family struggles and arguments and what have you, but let us do that struggling and arguing inside our house before we come out and talk about our grand plans, because we need to start being realistic about vaccine manufacturing. And it's not just vaccine manufacturing. We need to talk now about manufacturing all countermeasures on the continent. We need to talk about manufacturing of diagnostics. We need to talk about manufacturing of therapeutics and how we increase our oxygen production. There's been a disproportionate focus on vaccines because, of course, of the panic of COVID. But I think it's now time to step back a moment and think that it is not just vaccines that are going to protect this world. I want to take the example of Egypt. I love this story, and I'm so sad that the Egyptian minister was unable to be here this week, because I would have loved to have a deep conversation with them on it. In the diagnostics field, Egypt did a surveillance and have just recently been declared Hep C free. A surveillance study on, or they did surveillance in their population, 62 million people, 9 months, and found all the cases of Hep C, also did other screening at the same time. What am I saying? They invested in their own people. They invested in primary healthcare at its base level. And for every dollar they spent, they got a $3.62 return on that investment. What we are talking about in this disproportionate focus now on everybody wanting, and the continent wanting to purchase vaccines, to manufacture vaccines, is a money sink, unfortunately, before I get to the technicality of it, is a money sink when we should really be investing in our health systems. That is my first thing. And people here are going to say, oh my goodness, did she really say that? Yes, I did. Because if you're manufacturing vaccines, but there are no health centers in your villages, what is that? If you're manufacturing vaccines, and the Abuja Declaration, which I spoke about last night at the opening ceremony, 22 years we have not yet input the 15% we said we were going to put in healthcare while we're manufacturing vaccines. Now I see my sister Marianne, she's nodding. I'm also not saying that the charity model is correct. The charity model is broken. And the Gavis of this world and I saw my brother, the former CEO, Seth, this morning, the Gavis of this world and the global funds of this world, those models are going to need to change. And we're going to have to be more of an investor in those things. But we have to take a step back as to how quickly we want to say we're stepping into this vaccine manufacturing market. Now, on the value chain, we can really absolutely do a lot of work with that, because one of the reasons why people want to manufacture vaccines is because we're afraid. You're afraid that the last time we got shut out. So we want to manufacture our own vaccine so that the next time we're not left behind. But why don't we also get clever and look perhaps at the components along the value chain of vaccine manufacturing? Why don't we get clever, some of our different countries, and get together, be it East Africa, West Africa, whatever the blocks, and look at what are those components that can we provide so that we are part of that longer value chain, and the world can therefore not produce vaccines without us. Because even within the global south, we've all just recently been in India, and I'm seeing my friend over here, recently been in India, the G20. I visited the Serum Institute of India, and I can tell you that the investment that it has taken to put those facilities in is not a small one. I had a private meeting with the chairman who told me his story, and we cannot do that in 18 months. Or in 2 years. So for me, some of these conversations I feel perhaps are a little bit of appeasement, or let's talk about manufacturing in Africa, when really nobody has any real intention of really fully committing to manufacturing in Africa. So let's talk about the reality, what can be a reality in the moment. Let's talk about what is the market shaping of this, who can manufacture vaccines on the continent, who has the capacity to sustain it. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jodi, and I can already see an interesting discussion evolving between you and Emile, for example. But there are also country commitments, and I think maybe not one place is the same as another, but I think there are also many people who agree with many things that you've said today already. Good. Now, industry has decided to invest in this vision, and we have Siek Putting here, who is the CEO of BioNTech, who are actually putting a manufacturing facility in the context of Rwanda. And I would like to hear from Mr. Putting how that has shaped up and what your challenges have been and what you anticipate as being the opportunities, and how you see yourself as part of this ecosystem, which is clearly a little wider than industry, and countries are having to remain in the driving seat. Please.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being part of this panel here. And I'm glad that my previous speakers already touched on many of these points. So let me quickly elaborate. I mean, first of all, as you heard before, it's really about partnerships. Nobody can do this alone. That's really number one. And I'll go into depth. Like, there are so many things where we have to work together to get this really done. And I'll follow up with many, many examples why this is already a working effort and this bears some fruits already. Number two is what I'm talking about, our BioNTech approach for like a modular facility that we're gonna or are installing in Rwanda actually at the moment, this modular mRNA facility. That's not the solution for all vaccine manufacturing on the continent. It's a solution. And what you heard before from my previous speakers, actually, there is an ecosystem forming already. And what we are trying to do is like be one puzzle piece into this ecosystem. So let's go back in time a little bit. Why do we have our so-called biocontainers, our modular manufacturing system? So back in 2020, in March 2020, so when we started to develop a vaccine, so you remember everybody was scared, potentially in lockdowns and so on, and we started to develop a vaccine, and we said at that point, well, we have to produce it as well. If we are able to make a vaccine, we have to be able to produce it. So in March 2020, we sat down already with our team and said, like, well, we have to produce basically 1 billion doses or 1 billion doses plus or something. How do we do this? At that point in time, we were able to do 1 gram of mRNA, which was like 20,000 doses per week, and that was not enough. So we sat down and said, like, how do we scale this up? And one of the solutions was we have a drawing, our napkin, so to say, where we drew out a modular manufacturing clean room with mRNA equipment scaled up. And we said, like, okay, that could work, actually. So this was March 2020. Then we realized because of supply chain constraints, there's no steel, there's no nothing right now, everything's locked down, we can't do this. So we put this in the drawer, started our bigger manufacturing hubs. So we started our Marburg facility, for example, which eventually did more than 1 billion doses of vaccine, but in Europe. Yeah? And now we come to this issue. The vaccine didn't go there where it was really needed. It didn't go to Africa. So, and we, by the end of the year of 2020, we realized we are able to produce a vaccine, and we have a solution in the drawer for a modular manufacturing facility, and you need to bring, or you need to establish local manufacturing in Africa. So I think we have a use case here, and we said, while producing the big amounts of vaccine in our Marburg facility, we said we have to develop this modular manufacturing facility because it's a complex process, it's a very new process, but it's doable. So we basically did the engineering and started to build a prototype. And by that time, we started to liaise with countries and the African countries, the African Union, the African CDC, Dr. Nakongasong, for example, Rwanda. We talked to Ghana, Nigeria, and so on, various countries, Senegal. And we're trying to scope out how we best do this. And I think over the course of 21, we made a statement in August 21 to say, like, okay, we'll go to Africa, we'll establish manufacturing there. We broke ground last year in June. And by end of the year, we will have a facility hall ready. We have one biocontainer shipped already, which is a clean room capable of like producing mRNA vaccines or other therapeutics, actually, I'll come to that, in Rwanda. So by December, there will be a hall, we can move in the biocontainer, we can start validating the equipment and starting up production, actually. So it is possible. Why is it possible? It's possible because we have all these partners. Yeah? We have the African Union, we have the African CDC, we have the AMA newly established. We are talking to, we are working with the Rwandan government actually on education, on training programs. So we send people to Marburg, to our prototype site. We have a team established in Rwanda actually for building, but also for education, for training the processes and so on. We need regulators to help us because nobody ever did this complex tech transfer from a newly developed mRNA into an African country or to that point anywhere in the world in a biocontainer. So that's very innovative, and we need the partners and their help here. So having said that, we said also we need to start now. I agree with you, Ayade. There are. Is there a market yet? How will this be financed and so on? We don't really know yet, but I think we had to start building this because otherwise we will be in the next pandemic and the next pandemic and nothing will be happening. So that's why we are doing this, and it's tremendous, this partnership attitude that we have, because people are helping, countries and agencies are helping to bring this up and running. And that's not the end. So a little bit of an outlook. I mean, because it's mRNA production, it's fairly easy to transfer the vaccine manufacturing from this facility, which is about 50 plus million doses per year. You can also switch it to cancer vaccines, for example. The problem is there are no cancer vaccines in the market yet, so they're not approved yet, but they are being developed. So I think in due time, you can switch this to potentially malaria, potentially tuberculosis, etc., but also cancer vaccines and other therapies based on mRNA therapeutics. Yeah, this is one of the future pieces. Comes with it is clinical trial establishment, but also bringing up the ecosystem also for clinical development, clinical manufacturing of batches, and so on. So again, this is not the solution, but I think what we are trying to establish right now with the partners here on the table and in Rwanda and in Africa is a first step into like real manufacturing in Africa. So I hope you can see new pictures by the end of the year of how the facility looks like and that it's shaping up. And with that, a big thanks to everybody here to make this possible, because alone we couldn't have done it so far. Thank you.
Thank you for showing a strong belief in technology as well. All these things need little steps, and obviously, you know, we need the real implementation. And I'm welcoming Manuel Batz from the German International Agency of Cooperation. I've badly translated that, sorry, to give us the take on the contribution of the German GITS within the European strategy. And now I need to just see or get to your slide. Here we go.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, my name is Manuel Batz. I work at GIZ. I support a project that tries to build local vaccine manufacturing on the continent. Thanks, Beate, for inviting me to your great panel. Yeah, let's kick it off with the first slide. It's 5 slides. I'm a bit embarrassed that I'm the only one with PowerPoints. I hope you will not fall asleep, so I will try to make it engaging. First slide, please. So the first slide is about the German contribution to the vaccine and pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa. And there are 3 takeaways for you. So the first one is the amount to the left, 550 million euros in total for this purpose. We have the second takeaway are the partners. Where is this happening? So on the African Union level, SADC and EAC, these are sub-regions on the continent, as well as Senegal, Ghana, Rwanda, and South Africa. And the money is spent on a variety of projects with different implementation organizations. You see the logos there. And they are all aligned to the PAVM BOLD program and the work streams. And you can see here the most relevant ones. So the message here is it's quite a substantial sum of money, and we are fully supporting the PAVM agenda. Next slide, please. Now Germany is not alone. We have the European Union that is also working on supporting indigenous capacity for vaccine manufacturing. And they have created this so-called Team Europe initiative on manufacturing and access to vaccines, TEI MAF Plus. And the German contribution is part of it, 550 million. And the total budget is 1.2 billion euros. And you can think about the TEI MAF Plus as a portfolio, a collection of all the projects from Belgium, France, other countries that all aim to support the local African agenda to build vaccine capacity. And it's a coordination effort of the European Union. That's all you need to know on this slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, then a little bit of background on my project where I'm working in, Backup Health, vaccine production. It's a global program. And my component that I'm leading with a team consists of 2 elements. Number 1 is integrating a European-funded Team Europe support structure that where the GIZ is having a share in, and we are, in my component, supporting the PAVM Secretariat directly with 4 embedded experts. Market design, access to finance. So they work for the Secretariat but are funded with the GIZ and the European money. And we have also a budget for study tours on vaccine technologies, where we offer the opportunity to learn about what it takes to manufacture vaccines in Europe or Asia. But the project started 1st of January. We are in the middle of the implementation. And then there's a second component. We have additional funds now inside to then work on supporting the work streams with studies, with workshops. We call it missing links. We go there where perhaps there is a need, where there's gaps of analysis, of knowledge, of insights, and then we move in. And our focus is on capacity building, market shaping, and the private sector engagement. Next slide, please. Here I have brought you a snapshot of an update from selected work streams that we just got from the PAVM Secretariat to present in this panel on Friday. And it's just to give you first message here is market shaping, regulatory strengthening, R&D, and talent development. These are priority work streams at the moment where progress is needed and where a lot of efforts go in. And in the market design and demand intelligence, work is now being put into developing a pooled procurement mechanism. And this sounds easy, but it's quite complex. The legal framework, the technicality. This is apart from the Gavi pooled procurement or the offtake mechanism that is is not included in there. Then on the second, the regulatory strengthening. there are big efforts being made and also progress being made. Some countries have moved into the ML3, maturity level 3 stage, which is a big success. And the efforts are strengthened here with regional centers of regulatory excellence that should serve as a backbone of the AMA, in the end. And on the bottom, you have the R&D and talent development. So here it's all about building the skills you need to manufacture vaccines and biologics, also doing the R&D in this area. And you see here there are partnerships now launched with WHO and CEPI to in the end to build in the first step 2 R&D centers of excellence to be established in 2024. Then to the next and final slide, please. I just try to summarize a few key takeaways from my experience and perspective. So what I see is there is a strong political commitment. There's very strong from AU and EU. And the pandemic seems it's over. The hot phase, but it's not forgotten. So the commitment is still there. That's very important. But it was such a disaster that I think people cannot forget so easily and move to the situation before. Then the scope is broadening beyond vaccines. So we talk about diagnostic manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing. This brings me to point 3. The tangible progress made in the improvement of the framework conditions, they also serve for pharmaceutical manufacturing. If a regulator is fit to regulate pharmaceutical manufacturing, and this is now driven with the vaccine push, it can also be used for tablets, for other treatments. So this is the good thing. The money is not wasted. There is value created as we speak, even though perhaps with the vaccine ambition there might not be so quick and so successful as expected. But so it's a good message overall. And then, from my perspective, innovation plays a key role to have sustainable vaccine manufacturing. And I'm thinking this is what the modular, flexible manufacturing designs. BioNTech is an example, I think, of that. Continuous intensified processing, reducing cost, increasing yields, novel modalities, viral vectors, mRNA. If you try to copy what is standing in India, you will not be competitive. If you take the new modalities and new technologies, then Africa has the same playing level, starting field. So therefore these novel modalities are important. With this, thank you, and back to you, Beate.
Thank you. I think a fair amount of health system strengthening might come from all of these initiatives, Yuri. So I think there is some good ambition being shown here, but I also completely get the restrictions. So, Marie-Ange, you are talking on behalf of Gavi, and when you hear poor procurement mechanisms that are not Gavi, how does that resonate? And how do you feel about this whole development? Who is going to buy who is going to buy the vaccines? That was the question Yuri was asking at the beginning. I know I'm putting you on the spot. Tell us what you think.
Thank you. And I look forward to the retirement, frankly.
There's no excuse.
But as you were saying, I think, and I think my sister was saying, I think, this effort has to be on the long term. It's very important. So I think it's great that we talk about political commitment, but it has to be sustained. I think it's fantastic that Yodi was talking about, and we were together in India visiting Serum Institute, because we have been working in Gavi with Serum Institute for more than 15 years. So maybe people started hearing about Serum Institute during COVID, but we have been working with them on building that capacity. So I think this long-term endeavor is critical. And so when Beate, we think about, okay, how do we get African products into the arms of children in Africa and elsewhere in the world? How do we integrate this plan? I think, the long-term vision is important. most importantly, and Gavi as the largest purchaser of vaccine in the world, and having developed a deep understanding of this market shaping and the innovative finance mechanism coming with it, is really regarding where are the needs first, because we heard a lot here about plans, production, and so on, but where are the needs? And I think the first thing, that's what we've tried to look at. When we heard the call from the EU about producing, the majority of the vaccine that they plan to use in Africa, is where are the needs? Because, we have seen following the COVID-19 that a lot of plans were about COVID-19, but guess what happened? Overproduction, right? And, the pandemic vaccines are fine, but there's one thing: you cannot guarantee the demand. So you cannot have a sustainable business there. And so, we thought about, okay, how can we think about a sustainable plan to actually step back, as Yodi mentioned, to actually look at, how can it go, what needs to be done, where do we start and where do we go? And eventually, we developed this strategy that was shared and also supported by Germany as the G7 president at the time. And the positive thing first is that the needs are there, and there's a market. The needs are there, especially on routine immunization, because we know how many children are born every year in Nigeria and elsewhere, and how many vaccines they need. But also, looking ahead, I think it's very important not to be just stuck, in the lessons of the pandemic, because we are already in different times. Looking ahead, we do think that there are vaccines that are more regional than before. So there's even more a need to have vaccines produced in Africa. And, we have been talking here about, the impact of climate change, the nexus of climate change and health. And vaccines are actually probably one of the most effective, adaptation tool. Yellow fever, malaria, and we are fortunate now to have just, a second malaria vaccine that will need to be produced. So we have mapped actually the antigens that are needed where you don't have enough producers. And so it's actually for, we are not telling producers go and do them. But actually we are saying that's where needs are. And that can be a business opportunity. And also, I didn't talk, of course, of the vaccines that are still being developed. I see my colleague here, Sol from CEPI, and that actually will be needed in Africa, given what we know and the climate change. And how also it can affect, actually, unfortunately, the low and middle income countries even more. So there's a market. We understand the needs. Now, how do we integrate, then how do we incentivize producers to come from the continent in that market? And so we looked in a market that is competitive, very competitive, but also where economies of scale are quite important. And when we look at the countries that have been successful in that business, it's fair to say these are large countries. Of course, they have the capacity and the capability that have been discussed here about building, but these are large countries or countries that can export it at large scale. And while we think Africa is a big market, the reality is first 55 countries. And we have to build that market. Because, in terms of trade and so on. So, that dimension is important and will need to be worked on by the EU also, and there's Africa free trade, and so there are positive development there, but it has to happen. At the same time, being a competitive market, what's important is to think, okay, what's needed to facilitate the introduction of vaccine producers there. And there, we have looked at the situation, and it's fair to say that, that it will need support over time to be able to introduce manufacturers in the business so that they can be competitive over time. And so that's where Gavi, we have worked, based on our innovative finance experience in developing, an instrument that we call the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator, AVMA, together with PAVM, Africa CDC, and other organization to look at, okay, how can we smooth that introduction financially so that financial support can be given at least for 10 years, because it's a long-term endeavor, as I mentioned, to allow manufacturers to be able to compete in that market. So we are actually, we are in the process of finalizing the instrument. We are talking about a $1 billion accelerator that will be going to our board in December, and that has really a great support from various parties. And it's really about supporting at least 4 manufacturers to come into this market, both fill and finish and drug substance, different platform, to be able to produce, at least 700 million doses a year over time, and really, being able to compete. Because I think where we have to be clear is that we do want to have the right product, but rightly priced. Because if it's to have a product that is 3 times more expensive, clearly it doesn't work. Especially because we still need to bring kids to school, pay water and sanitation, do other infrastructure investments. And so finding that equilibrium is what we know has required a lot of thinking. What's really encouraging is that, we have tried this instrument before, especially for the pneumococcal vaccines, and it has really helped bring a product competitively priced. Of course, this is one piece of the puzzle. What it will help is bringing over time competitively manufacturers. What it helps also, and we have been working with financiers, with international financial organizations like IFC, because as much as they want to support the investment in plants, they need to know that there's an off-taker and that you can have this guaranteed, off-take, that Gavi can provide, or other countries. I think what will be very important, and I think you were alluding to it, is really in the end also that the product is demanded by the countries. That's very important. So there's an important element of demand generation, of people will be willing to switch products. It's not a mundane thing, because we have seen it in the past that sometimes you provide the products, the same products, and people prefer other type of products. So I think that's very important, and there really needs to be a strong effort there at the EU level also to have to get this type of products. So I think the road is very promising. I think it's the best time. I think we have to be very clear. It's a long-term effort that is high opportunity, high risks, but also indeed, and I'm very pleased that you already mentioned this. The willingness of everybody to contribute. What's very positive in terms of vaccine, at least in Africa, already in Gavi, the vaccine that we provide, they are financed at 41% on average by the countries themselves. So they are convinced. So, so I think that's also, so it's not something, that is new. It's actually maintaining that commitment and go even further, because in the end, that's, the best way forward. So I'll stop there.
There's no way we can have a wise and pragmatic woman retire, so no way. This is a marathon, not a sprint, we know. And there are many elephants in the room. And one of the elephants is going to be addressed by Chanel in the next talk, which will put the financial situation on the map. And but we've already also heard some really encouraging figures there of the contribution that's already on the table. So Chanel, please.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for including me on the panel. So post-pandemic, most countries and regions have moved toward an onshoring, a nearshoring, a friendshoring strategy across industries, certainly in the chip industry, in the biopharma industry. So most industries that national governments felt there was some sort of scarcity. This week, The Economist attacks that and talks about it as home economics and kind of builds a case for cautioning about an over onshoring or nearshoring. But of course, it also acknowledges that there are industries or business areas where it makes sense. And when we think about the expenditure on vaccines in Africa, I think McKinsey made a report that quantified the current annual expenditure from all 55 countries around $1.3 billion. And they projected that out to be $2.3 billion at current growth rates by 2030, and then made a projection that could exceed $5 billion per year if coverage increased and if there was additional vaccines that were procured. So that's a really big market. And of course, when you think about a continent that was so unjustly treated at the pandemic, and when child health is such a priority for the continent, this is an area that seems natural for there to be such an effort. But it's a very complicated business. This is not a commodity business. There are so many parts to the ecosystem that are really complicated, so it's a very high-risk business. There are plenty of examples of failures of national attempts at establishing vaccine manufacturing that hasn't worked, and it's why over time it has been so predominantly privatized and reduced. There are so fewer manufacturers of vaccines in the market today than there were 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. So really understanding this market is super important. And the business case for every manufacturer or potential manufacturer scrubbing their numbers, and I won't go into that. So I think I'll focus on really one topic. So I'm an independent, but I worked at UNICEF for 21 years. And when I joined UNICEF, in the late 1990s, we had a global shortage of DTP and tetanus vaccines. And UNICEF was shocked by it. I think the whole world was shocked by it. It took years to recover, and I think it definitely re-triggered UNICEF into thinking, what is the role of a buyer in the health of a market? And I think this points to that question of what are the roles of buyers? At the time, we went to the existing manufacturers, which was a shrinking number, and heard what they needed from us in order to get them to keep producing or to come back producing. And in many ways, it was simple things. They wanted multi-year procurement for them to take production line planning decisions. It couldn't be year-on-year procurement decisions. They wanted medium and long-term demand forecasts so they could establish their business strategies of which portion of that demand they wanted to target and then build their production capacity for. They wanted multi-year contracting framework so they would have estimates of how much UNICEF would procure, and they wanted an acceptance of a price range. And this is probably one of the toughest points, and probably the main thing I want to underscore, is that a really tough decision is going to be when a national buyer or a supranational AU procurement mechanism, which hopefully will exist to enable this, or any regional or global procurer. The toughest decision is when they have to choose between paying, for example, 70 cents from an African manufacturer for a vaccine or 50 cents for an Indian manufacturer. And that differential doesn't seem a lot when you're deciding on coffees, but when you're providing hundreds of thousands of doses or millions of doses, that adds up on an already pressured national health budget. These are very tough decisions. And even though there's economic investment on the continent, that doesn't necessarily translate to increased health budgets. So this decision around price differential, particularly in the beginning when economies of scales and efficiencies won't be established, is one of the things that could result in a failure. And so, I mean, there are ways of mitigating it. There can be national and continental policies that prioritize local production, regional production. They could also prioritize local or regional production that has components of the vaccine sourced from local or regional sub-suppliers, so that you're building in redundancy and interdependency between countries on trade, and also increasing the footprint of spend on the continent. But without these policies, the buyers, the bureaucratic task of taking a procurement decision, will choose the lowest price, which will undermine the investments, particularly at the curve again where economies of scale and efficiencies are being developed. And so how is that done? Well, obviously you can set policies. You can also set targets. So you can have a target where you want to buy a certain percentage of your procurement from regional or local manufacturers. You can be very explicit with this. There are good examples of one. I'm going to share one, but you really have to think about the procurement and what is the legislative framework, and who are the countries involved, and whose money are you talking about. And I think that supranational decision making, well, the political will seems very high, but it's also giving up some sovereignty, which is not an easy thing. So I think this is something that there really needs a lot of discussion on, and similar what Emile has referred to, even with the Continental Regulatory Authority. UNICEF was buying ready-to-use therapeutic food, which is a peanut-based food that brings children that are facing severe acute malnutrition and that are very immunosuppressed, and it is a life-saving treatment. And when that was first being introduced, there was 90% of it was imported from Europe predominantly, and 95% of the demand was in Africa. And at UNICEF, we received a ton of critiques from civil society of why weren't we taking measures to get that product produced on the continent. And we had to do a lot of reflections and discussions with industry, but we set a target. We wanted at least 50% of what we procured to come from local manufacturers. We didn't know how that was going to happen, the implication of setting a public target like that, but setting a public target and working for it in a transparent way told the market that this is where our procurement spend is going to be. And that gave them it gives the market some level of assurance. And surely, when you looked up after 7 years, we had exceeded that target. And it wasn't easy because the local manufacturers of this therapeutic food, which is very sensitive and complex to make, they didn't have access to capital. You know, the borrowing rates in in Africa are abhorrent. And so in order to get reduced rates of borrowing for the capital, they would take our procurement contracts to the bank in order to get the cost of capital reduced. And it's these type of things that the buyer needs to think about in order to enable an industry to effectively make this transition. So that's a model that could be looked at. I mean, I think there's so much analysis that's already being undertaken. I think one of the toughest thing, but it sounds like it's working, moving forward, is this transnational pooled procurement, so that you're moving the spend to the continent and moving the decision making to the continent, and also what they're buying from the continent. And we saw the EU do this in the summer of 2020. The EU was not a single block buyer of vaccines. Every country bought their own, went to the market independently, and it was COVID that brought them together, and the EU created a vaccine strategy, and it was the first time that EU member states went to the market as a block, and that really increased their negotiating power and their economies of scale. Of course, I'm sure there was complications with that, and they're still, as I understand, trying to figure that out. But there are also examples that we can point to help this be efficient and to minimize price differentials, so that over time the goal of having the vaccine market in Africa be healthy, and healthy for budgets, and healthy for children, and healthy for the industry. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anel. It's really important to also reflect on good examples of practice that are already there on which we can build, so not everything has to start from scratch. Good. Our next speaker is Professor Ole Peter Ottesen, who... Michael. And I am really sorry. Our next speaker is the director of the EDCTP, which is the organization that gives us funds for conducting research and capacity building within the European Union framework. And I would like to ask you, Michael, to tell us what you see the role of a funder like EDCTP. What do you see the strategic developments in that area? There are a couple of calls every year for NRA strengthening, etc., capacity building also in the framework of ethics, etc. So I'd be really excited to hear what you think is the role of EDCTP in this.
Thank you very much for this very exciting discussion. Looking at the role of the European and developing countries clinical trials partnership in the implementation of vaccine manufacturing in Africa, we are looking at it from the point of view of the whole value chain, looking at the end user, keeping the end user in mind, and our main focus is on the clinical development facet. And we are paying more attention on the late stage product development and also the capacity that goes with it. We now have a 20-year track record of working in sub-Saharan Africa with a presence in 44 African countries that are collaborating with 20 countries in Europe and global partners. And we have an innovative financing mechanism that brings in financing from the European Union that is matched by financing from the European member states and African member states that are part of the EDCTP association. And currently we have 27 African member states and 15 European member states that are part of the association contributing to the matching funds. And this is aimed at having co-ownership of what is done, because it is important to have excellence and also ownership of what is developed. And I'm glad to report that we've also had the launch of the third EDCTP program. This is the Global Health EDCTP 3 program, which was created in the frame of the European Union Comprehensive Strategy with Africa, and also is keeping the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in mind, and also building on the success, of course, of the 20 years of investing in clinical research and the capacity. We also want to prevent or to minimize fragmentation of efforts of the investments that are coming from the European Union. So we are working closely with the Team Europe initiative on manufacturing and access to vaccines, medicines, and health technologies in Africa. And keeping in mind our overall program objectives of advancing the development of medical interventions, we bring in an important part, and that is the cross-learnings of lessons learned from the development of other medical interventions, and also the cross-learnings of dealing with other diseases in sub-Saharan Africa and also globally. This is very important, especially at a time where you want to develop vaccines that are, of course, developed rapidly, but at the same time are paying attention to regional representation. This requires leveraging on capacity that has been built for other diseases. And from what we've observed, the countries that responded best to COVID-19 on the African side are countries that were doing well in research in the other areas. So when we talk about preparedness, we have to ensure that we have continued investment in these other areas to keep the research capacity warm and going, and at the same time drawing lessons from there. And of the main priorities, especially of the special procedure that is involving the Team Europe initiative that we want to collaborate with, I've picked out 3 priority areas where we as an organization, we feel we can bring value. And that is on the side of research and development associated with new or improved medical interventions, that is the clinical trials aspect. The second is on the regulatory strengthening at country level in coordination with the regional players. And here we are talking about on the European side in coordination with the Medicines Agency, European Medicines Agency, and the African side, the World Health Organization African region, Africa CDC, AUDA NEPAD, and the European and the African Medicines Agency that is being developed. And I'm glad that a colleague is here to represent AMA. And the third part is on innovation and digitization to enhance access to medicines. On one hand, it is very important to develop the products, but it is very important to pay attention to the implementation systems that will make these products available to the people that need them most. Over.
Thank you very much. And, there's no question that EDCTP grants have made a fantastic contribution to building the research capacity in Africa. I've been a recipient in our organization of a number of these grants, and we know how much of the regional contribution has been made, and the clinical trial capacity building has been tremendous, and people who are in trials do better than people who are not in trials, which leads to the whole point about the R&D that you also touched on. Which leads me swiftly over, now having not confused the order any further, to ask Professor Ole Ottesen to speak to us about the role of the European academic institutions in this space, how we can partner in an equitable way with the African institutions on the particular focus of the PAVM, and how you see the landscape in the context of the EU health strategy as well.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to say a few words about what the academic institutions can contribute to in this very complex matter that we are discussing here today. So you forgot, Beate, to tell the audience that the title of my presentation is slightly longer because it says, how can academic institutions assist when it comes to building capacity for vaccine production in Africa? And then you added, or can they? So you instilled some humility, in fact, in my title. And I think it is absolutely relevant to instill some humility here, because the complexity of the issue at hand is enormous. And that is perhaps also something that can reduce the humility, because there aren't that many institutions that can cover the entire value chain, from education, skill development, research, regulatory science, all the different factors that have to be in place in order for the entire value chain to work. So I will switch from humility to perhaps a more positive attitude to what the academic institutions can do for promoting a more just distribution of facilities not only for vaccine production, obviously, but also for medicine production and production of diagnostics. First of all, I would like to address on a very overarching level the responsibility of academic institutions in this particular field. What really saddened me as then the president of Karolinska Institute, now I have stepped down, the new president is here in the audience. What really saddened me as an academic and a university president is that the fruits of science were unjustly distributed. Africa, not least, were not allowed to enjoy the fruits of science because, think of it, vaccines, medicines, they are the true fruits of science. When we read the newspapers and were exposed to social media during the pandemic, it was said very frequently that the new vaccines and medicines, they were produced at warp speed by academic institutions in collaboration with industry. But that is not true. The point is that the success in developing vaccines and medicines derives from decades of basic research in academic institutions. And to me, it's quite natural to look at science as a global public good. Everybody should enjoy the fruits of science. But this did not happen. And I think this gives us, as academics, a special responsibility to help ensure that next time around, everybody will be able to enjoy the fruits of science. This is for me a very strong argument that, Beate, we as academics should contribute to what I see as a global effort, a joint effort, to really see to it that we can arrive at a more just distribution of production facilities. So, what, in more concrete terms, could we contribute with? And Emil, we have had how many Zoom meetings to really see how can we fit into the strategy that has been brought to the table in Africa, because that is one very important thing, that whatever we do from academic institutions in Europe or other continents, our efforts should be aligned with the PAVM. We should work and contribute on the premises that you have laid before us. So the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing Program should lead the way also for our contributions to these efforts. So that's one thing. Another thing that is absolutely central is that we look at every step, as Emil also pointed out, in the value chain to see where do we need more research, where are there voids that have to be filled by new research. Because, as we all know, no chain is stronger than the weakest link. And we have to look, as academic institutions, into skill development, clinical trials. We already have a very good collaboration, as you know, Emil, when it comes to clinical trials. Eleni Aklilu is one of the driving forces. She's not here, unfortunately, but other colleagues of mine are here. We need also, of course, to have regulatory science in place, because it's a paradox, but I think I should say this. There must also be equity when it comes to the quality of the products. Otherwise, things will fail. So the same quality standards should apply, obviously, regardless of where these products are being formed. And that requires regulatory science and clinical trials, obviously. The last thing I would like to say is that there are aspects of governance dysfunctions, as we all know, in this particular field. And some of the governance dysfunctions have been addressed already. And I should perhaps refer to a paper which I think was an eye-opener, or should be an eye-opener for many, and that was a paper that was published in, or a piece that was published in New York Times on Monday, the 8th of October. William Ruto was one of the authors. And I pointed to a governance dysfunction that I think we should take very seriously, and that is, of course, the debt situation that many African countries phase. And the heading was very clear. Africa cannot cope with global challenges until the world can cope with the debt situation in Africa. So I'm happy to say at this particular point in time that now we will be launching a new Lancet Commission that will address the global governance dysfunctions that have been so obvious during the pandemic, and that must be rectified before the next pandemic hits. There are so many elephants in the room, but one of them is simply the global governance dysfunction or dysfunctions that prevent us from moving ahead as fast as we should and as fast as our ambitions tell us. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, and thank you to all of you for really also having kept to time. We didn't need to wave the table tennis racket, so that was excellent. So I know you're dispersing with comments and questions, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask a few things to the panel that we have. Is that all right? Okay, the gentleman here were first, so you go first, but make your questions short and make your answers short. Otherwise, we're going to end up with just 2 questions in the room. And there's a mic coming. Thank you all for your contributions.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I will make it so brief. And my name is Modrek Chibi. I work for WHO in the European region, but before I used to head innovation and science at WHO in the African region. This is a very short one. Just to also make a point that Africa used to produce vaccines a long time ago, and many of these vaccine manufacturing capacity closed down. One, due to increased demand on the regulation, as well as, of course, imports, relying on imports. So my point is, when you're talking of sustainability of vaccine manufacturing capacity on the continent, we should actually look at 2 things. With our innovative mind, we should now think of producing combination vaccines that can be used in humans as well as in animals in one health approach. I think opening markets should be our primary goal now, instead of us trying to wiggle around in terms of finances. Number 2, with respect to vaccine manufacturing capacity, we should also think of running a parallel line on biotherapeutics. There is a business case that was actually carried out in terms of how can we sustain mRNA vaccine manufacturing capacity on the continent. And it came up that also introducing a biotherapeutic, we have kids dying out of RSV infection in Africa. Insulin is not, there are only few companies that produce insulin. Why can't we do that in terms of trying to really make sure that the capacity of vaccine manufacturing capacity is sustained? I'm talking of sustainability instead of just. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Big question. Sirk, do you want to have a quick comment from industry on those topics?
I'm happy to brainstorm. So I mean, so no. I mean, yes, it is meant we have to have sustained manufacturing in Africa, and I think we're happy with all the parties to go the first step and say we will find the demand. Yeah, will it be Comirnaty? Will it be the COVID vaccine? I don't know. Yeah, maybe some, but I'm happy to brainstorm anything, and the new therapeutics will be sometime out. But let's start now. Will it be animals? Anything? Clinical trials? I think. Because everybody made that step, let's be creative and find something. Yeah, it needs to be sustainable because otherwise people are twiddling their thumbs and then you ramp down the operations again. We have to find something, but we will. Yeah, so we have so many ideas. Happy to discuss and connect.
Great. There was a second question right here from the front, and then I have the gentleman over there, and there was a lady at the back as well. So, okay, quick.
Thank you. My name is Vijay. I'm a freelance journalist representing Health Policy Watch. So this whole panel sounded to me like a great example of what a true multi-sectoral discussion or approach could be when panned out into the ongoing pandemic agreement negotiations. So that's one elephant in the room, I believe, that wasn't addressed. So I believe you would be able to answer that question. Linked to that is, this implementation of vaccine manufacturing in Africa, I believe it's not limited to pandemic vaccines only. And right now, when the global north has more access to monkeypox vaccines, Africa hasn't received a single dose of that vaccine, even with huge potential and lot of interest, knowledge, and sufficient capacity. So why is that, according to you? So it's, there is an equal number of people from the global north and global south. So could this panel be an example of bringing the gap closer or bridging the gap? Thank you.
Great. Jody, you want to give an answer to that question?
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you very much. Great to have a journalist ask a question because you've done your background research. Number one, on the pandemic agreement, I have to say that, I'm glad that you see this as a great example of multi-sectoral collaboration. I mean, I'm sitting here mildly frustrated because some of what I'm hearing almost feels like gaslighting. We talk about pooled procurement and the fact that Africa is putting together pooled procurement mechanisms, but we did that. I was together with John and Kegasong and several others during COVID. We had a pooled procurement mechanism. BioNTech and Pfizer wouldn't sell to us. So to sit here now and say that, Africa is going to have pooled procurement, let us call it like it is. You guys wouldn't sell to us. We had pooled procurement. We had our money. And this is why, when the lion learns to write, until the lion learns to write, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And this is why I also say that scientists and researchers and global health practitioners should study politics and geopolitics, because this right here, what we're doing right here today, this is geopolitics. Where are we sitting? We're sitting in Europe. We're sitting in Germany. And it is absolutely right. No, seriously. I mean, I came to join this panel. I mean, Beate was the first to invite me to the World Health Summit this year, and she's a dear friend and sister from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, so I came to join this panel. But I will tell you that I will not be gaslit. We cannot sit here and pretend that the past did not happen. We cannot sit here and pretend that people refuse to sell vaccines to us. We cannot sit here and say, how is Europe helping Africa to do research? I am a child of an institution in Africa. I'm a child. My father is a professor. My father, my mother. I mean, I'm a child of academics. It's not that we don't have academics in Africa. So please, let us tell it like it is. Bottom line is money is power. And so what we're dealing here is what is the money. What we're dealing here, I loved what you said, Chanel, about RUTF, because my background also is in humanitarian work and activity. So RUTF is a good example, and what we saw there was de-risking by the IFC. But because there was not only did people take their contracts to get money, but they also, I was asked by several UNICEF representatives, because I'm also ex-UNICEF, to go and look at various facilities for them to see whether they were okay. But the financing, there wasn't the amount of money involved that we're talking. Somebody said something just now. Somebody said, I forget what it was, that it was you. You said there was going to be how many billion? 2.53 billion at the moment, 5 billion per year in 2030. That is the market that the high-income countries of the world do not want to let go of. And that is why we are having containers, as some of my colleagues say, as opposed to what we're calling them. So I'm sorry, I cannot sit here in all good conscience and not be myself and not tell the truth. The bottom line is that and we talk about Africa, and this is why I said that and I tried to, say it in diplomatic language earlier, that we should get inside our house and get our house in order. But the bottom, let me drop it on the ground and let it finish as my final statement. The day Nigeria starts to produce vaccines, because by 2030, we're going to be the 5th largest population on the planet, it is over. It is over. There is no more. So African Union and EU are not the same entity. It's a false equivalence. We are not like the EU. We don't have the same sort of economic bloc power. So it is wrong to and I think maybe many of you don't understand how it works. We can't put it all in the same sentence. And this is why it is about governance. This is why this is geopolitics. This is why I say we must all also learn geopolitics, because until we have the right governance, my brother here talked about it. We used to manufacture vaccines. But this is why poor governance in Africa benefits high-income countries of the world. Thank you.
We get it. Thank you. Right. I can't decide who was first, so be quick, because we've got 5 minutes left.
My name is Lutz Heider. I'm a professor at the Pharmaceutical Institute of Tübingen University. I loved all the presentation. I especially loved the presentation by Marie-Ange. And you made one point that I think from Gavi there are plans to support 4 manufacturers to manufacture hundreds of millions of doses. I understand that in Africa currently many more than 4 people in 4 countries are developing plans to manufacture vaccines. And maybe that's a question also to Manuel, but do we run a problem, the danger to support too many of them and setting up many of them for failure? Because there will be many more than can economically survive. And if so, what we do about it?
Manuel or Marie-Ange?
I just want
Go
to...
ahead.
Just to be specific, I mean, the way we have sized the instrument, in a sense, looking at the needs that we see, and the demand in the medium term is to support at least 4. But I think a big thing about this instrument is of course to encourage others to come into the market. We are one piece of the puzzle. So I think I talked about how important the economies of scale are. I think it's great that Yodi mentioned the size of Nigeria, because that's exactly what we are talking about. You need to be big to actually be able to do this whole thing. Of course, so there's naturally a selection. And I think the whole point, at least, of us starting to look at this sustainable strategy is because, there were all these announcements about various projects. And it's important that ultimately we do get some sustainable financing. So there will be natural selections. There will be again, markets are growing, but clearly economies of scale matter, and that is that's quite important to consider.
Okay.
If you want to.
Question from...
Yeah, I'm Jean Weinbach, representing the French ministry, social ministries, including the Ministry of Health. Just wanted to mention that maybe there was a missing link today in this discussion. This is the citizen and the people. It's extremely important. There are still obscure forces at work, very efficient against vaccine and vaccine implementation everywhere in the world. In Africa, in Europe, everywhere. We have really to use health democracy also in this implementation. We have elected people that should demonstrate in their program how they take care and consider the issues, daily problem of people. I like the remark of Yodi, which highlighted the importance of the strengthening healthcare system. I would like to recall you that there was a 5th pillar in Actea, which was strengthening healthcare system, which was pushed by France, and this is something we should bear in mind. You were talking about safety and security of these products. This is extremely important to also, thanks to the work of regulatory agencies, whether it's at continental level, this is ensured through correct pharmacovigilance systems and so on. It's extremely important. But please consider what is made the daily life of people of, because it's so important when you understand there is no primary care at less than 10 kilometers and sometimes more, etc. We have to work on that if we want efficient vaccination.
Yeah, you're right, completely. And that wasn't a question, it was a very important comment. There is the last question, the gentleman at the back with the glasses, Suze. I'm sorry. Okay, well, we can all go and discuss later on outside. This isn't finished. Please.
Thanks so much. I'll be really brief. I feel like our pharmaceutical system is very broken, and we're not getting the vaccines and the medicines that we need to the people that need it, as has been discussed here. I think talking about elephants in the room, we have, big pharma at this conference yesterday, representatives from Pfizer, Gilead, talking about how great, the response was yesterday for COVID. And I think that, I don't know, like in terms of improving access to use of voluntary licensing, compulsory licenses, this is really important. It hasn't really been touched on. And I'd like to hear if the panel have any thoughts on how we can, if that's a usable mechanism for improving access to vaccines in Africa. Thanks.
Anyone wants to comment? We can go into trips, we can go into all sorts of I think it's going to be a little of a lengthy discussion, but I think the discussion needs to be had with every single representative from the industry that's out there. Okay, last question.
It was not a great response to the pandemic. Again, that's gaslighting. And this is a problem because people have come to a conference that obviously there's funding and there's funders, and funders have to have a place at the table, and that's absolutely fine. But those of us who are on the receiving end, those of us who watch people die, those of us who ourselves almost died, must sit up and say that no, it was not a good response to the pandemic. So we absolutely reject and we repudiate that. We also reject and repudiate the fact that it was because Africa could not vaccinate that we didn't get vaccines into the arms of the people. What happened during the pandemic was vaccine apartheid. What happened during the pandemic was inequity. What happened during the pandemic was that a life in Berlin was considered to be worth more than a life in Abuja. A life in Paris was considered to be worth more than a life in Botswana. This is what happened during the pandemic. And the pandemic accord is absolutely critical. The pandemic agreement is absolutely critical. And the reason there is so much pushback from countries of the North is because we in the South, the Africa Group, many others, are saying that we insist that our asks are at the table because we are the ones who will suffer the most if this happens again. Now, nobody is blaming the high-income countries. I say that if you point one finger outward, four of the fingers of the hand point back to yourself. It is our countries and our governments that have put us in this position. If our own governance structures were okay, if our own governance structures were in right order, if our own leaders were putting their money where their mouths were, we would not be in this situation. So it is not the fault of the West. We have to put our house in order, but we also cannot sit here and allow people to tell us that what happened and erase history, that what happened did not happen. Thank you.
But maybe the last sentence on that is what is coming out here and what is in evolution might be a good example of how things could change. So let's look forward rather than and learn from the mistakes that were made during the pandemic. Okay, on that note, I thank you all very much for your participation, and please keep discussing, and this is an iterative process. Thank you very much.